right. I am here with Garrett Michael. How you doing today, Garrett?
Not bad. Thanks for having me on. My full name is Garrett Michael Ziegler. But my I don't like to give Google too much, so I always put Garrett Michael on everything associated with Google.
Mm.
Um, but I appreciate you having me on. I've read through some of your stuff. Very insightful. You're
Wow, that's a very high praise.
very, very, very few things like that on Substack. There's a lot of cooking shit on Substack. Other stuff like the daily. Yeah, there's a lot of women talking about like cooking and gardening. All those are nice, but yours is a breath of fresh air. And I like to think that Marco Polo's is too.
I think the algorithm has got me in a ghetto over here because I don't see the cooking. I don't see the whatever the gardening and all of that stuff. I just see I guess philosophical content. I would say more so than just political content because I think, from my understanding, like you run an organization and it's is it like a journalistic, like an investigative journalistic organization? Is that how you
Precisely.
describe it?
Precisely. And just a quick
Mm-hmm.
word on the ghetto aspect. I think that if you're a nerd like me, you don't prefer Substack's app. Obviously, I've downloaded Substack's mobile app on my iPhone, but I appreciate the web version just because I can toy around with the URLs and find like there's a thing on the web version where there's leaderboards, and I always go look up cooking and all this other stuff that people, because I want to know what people are reading. If somebody were to hack my computer, they would think I was a leftist just because I'm more subscribed to left wing drivel than I am, because I know my what my beliefs are and everything, but I want to know what other people are reading. So that's how I found Crowley, which is how I subscribe to you. So that's sort of the genealogy of it. I like what Substack is trying to do, although their head of politics is the husband of a C-SPAN host. So that may, but they've been very good to us. We've been canceled by a half dozen payment processors and everything. And Substack is only censored one of our posts, which has since been rectified, and they did that at the request of the DOJ. So that's good. That's better than what a lot of service providers have fucked with us in many ways. So I'm glad.
So that request that came under the Biden administration for the
Precisely. Yeah. We
yeah.
were under active DOJ criminal investigation. And we know this because a contractor at the DOJ reached out to us and said, "Hey, you're being surveilled," because he had access to the internal Slack channel, and he sent us some screenshots and everything. We still have an out. We have a an ongoing FOIA, and they won't answer the FOIA because they know they're screwed. The contractor gave us the name of the feds who were investigating us. So we did a FOIA request for these exact bureaucrats by name and email, and their assholes puckered up because they knew they had a mole within their camp feeding them the information. They have not responded to our FOIA, which was submitted July 25th of last year. But yeah, they were investigating us for doxing, which is, of course, preposterous. The statute that we would have had to have violated for them to be legitimately investigating us is 18 USC 119, which is a subset of it's a particular subset of PII that they have to prove that the person publicized with the intent to place in bodily harm. And of course, we have a huge disclaimer on our effing website saying we do not intend to harm any of these feds who we are naming. So they lose the case right there, but they still, long story short, they were still investigating us. They got Substack received queries from the DOJ for our Substack information. So I mean, but this is what Joe's family did. So many of these stories will be revealed over the next decade, especially after he croaks, which could be by the end of the year. I mean, if the stuff has spread into his bones, I talked to a couple of neurologists about this, one from Tennessee. They said that the line in the press release announcing his prostate cancer was atypical in one sense, in that because a lot of men get prostate cancer and it's curable and everything else. But one thing that is really bad for the family is that it's in his bones now. So there will never be a time where Joe doesn't have prostate cancer. He'll never go back into remission. Once it's in your bones, you can survive a long time still. There's a chance he makes it to 90, but it's more likely he'll die soon. So, to answer your direct question, yes, we are an investigative group. We are an opposition research group, not for any particular party. We're a nonprofit. We're a C3. So by law, and the left-wing press gets this so totally wrong because a lot of them don't do the work. They're lazy, but they think that we work with the GOP or something. We can't do that. We actually follow the law. We've never worked with a particular candidate or party. We do oppo research for the public as a whole. So, for example, one of our findings that has not been publicized much is that there were more George W. Bush employees who signed the laptop letter saying that the contents of the laptop had all the hallmarks of a Russian information operation. There were more Republicans on that letter than Democrats. But if you read Fox News, you'll think that it was a left-wing cabal. It couldn't be further from the truth. No, it was actually a George W. Bush neocon-led cabal that hates Trump just as much as Clapper and Brennan. So that's the kind of research we do. Some would call it esoteric, but I find the research thoroughly intoxicating because nobody on the right is doing it. The GOP, the party's oppo research group in-house on South Capitol Street by the Rayburn building, they don't do what we do. They're more, this person wants to raise taxes and they spoke out against this. We only have about 6 different beats. We don't focus on a lot of beats. We only have a couple of topics, but those topics that we do focus on, we consider ourselves to go the deepest in the Western world. We've always said that our book on the Bidens is the deepest digital colonoscopy in the Western world ever conducted on a sitting first family. And we say that because we don't want to kid ourselves and think that the Chinese or another entity, the Israelis, the English, that they don't have a deep dossier on all these U.S. politicians. They do. So that's why we put the clause or the asterisk there that it's the deepest in the West, or at least America. And of course, this has brought us the ire of the former first family. We're still in litigation with Joe Biden's lone surviving son and the surviving son's sugar brother, who gave him $7 million to pay back taxes. So we have 2 pending lawsuits against me personally and the entity Marco Polo in federal and state courts. We've had to spend about $500,000 on attorneys to fend off these utterly frivolous lawsuits. But that's the whole point. There's nothing on me. Like, I come from a normal family, not poor, not rich, not scandalous. So there's really no angle for them other than to just try to bankrupt me. That's about their only path forward. And they got close, but we were able to fend off the lawfare by hiring a new, cheaper attorney.
So, do you guys, is it like you have a patron, you have a billionaire who really likes what you do, or is it a bunch of small donations? $500,000 is a lot of money, and that's just one lawsuit. That's not even the normal stuff that you do.
So we were founded in July of 2021. So almost 4 years to the day, July 7th of 2021. And that figure of $500,000 is over the course of the nonprofit. So we've raised, over the course of 4 years, about $1.2 million. $500,000 of that is going to donor or to lawfare. And that 1.2 is made up of thousands of donors. We do not have one single sugar daddy. We have a bunch of people on Substack, a bunch of people who found us through Twitter, a bunch of people who followed me originally or subscribed to my channel originally on Telegram. I was one of the few early channels on Telegram to sort of go mini viral right after AWS kicked Parler off their servers, and right after Trump got kicked off Twitter after January 6th, there was a mass exodus to Telegram. And I was one of the few people, because I was in the White House at the time. My last day in the Trump administration was January 19th of 2021. Right after that time period, Telegram, for about a 6-month period, was the only social media app where you could display wrongthink. And a bunch of people, a couple 100,000 people at one point were subscribing to me on Telegram. It's a lot less now because, quite frankly, Telegram is awash in bots and everything else. Telegram has the biggest bot problem in the social media space, but that's partly to their credit, which is they don't censor. And if you don't censor, you're going to have more of a bot problem. So I bet I'm still at 80,000 on Telegram, but there was a ton of people who are very interested in the contents of this laptop just because of the Pavlovian dog-like censorship response that occurred when the contents were leaked in the first place. And the group that I found in Marco Polo was the only place where you could see every email, see every photo, and see every document from the laptop. So what we are, to put it in a much crisper way, we're a very miniature Americanized version of WikiLeaks. That's what Marco Polo is. We have hosted leaked documents for the entirety of our existence, and we have received just a portion of the backlash that WikiLeaks did. I mean, you had, Mike Pompeo trying to kill Julian Assange. You had different big banks in the United States putting pressure on different donors to WikiLeaks. We're not there yet. We have seen a smaller version of that. We've got debanked from Fifth Third, for example, because one of the board members of Fifth Third Bank is a former colleague of Joe's in the Senate. So we've faced a little bit of the bullshit that WikiLeaks did, but now that Joe's out of office, that has dropped precipitously. But we still have this albatross of lawsuits hanging over our heads.
You don't necessarily have insight on this, but do you feel like the DOJ, because as far as I understand, correct me, but Kash Patel, Dan Bongino right now are the head of the FBI. So, is it, if this thing is totally frivolous, couldn't they just say, hey, we found out there was a frivolous lawsuit going on and we dismissed it? Or is it now in the court system and it's sort of out of the DOJ's hands? How does that work?
Yes, precisely. So the two lawsuits against us are in civil litigation. They're not, we weren't indicted. So there's nothing that Cash or Bongino could do to ameliorate that. If Joe did indict us and he went after a lot of people, but if that would have been dismissed by now, if there was an indictment against Marco Polo or me, but this is all civil. So there is very little that the feds can do legally to get rid of that. I mean, what we have to do at a systemic level is to go to a loser pay system like England does. It's one of the few things, in my opinion, this is all opinion, it's one of the few things, in my opinion, that the English do better than us. They do a lot of shit worse. They have a loser pay system. And until you institute that and you get some of these blood-sucking trial lawyers off of the take, you will continue to see this sort of lawfare. But once you have a loser pay system, 60% of the BS litigation will dry up like a snail in the sun.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I'm aware that you can. I think in your suit, I guess Hunter Biden was kind of launching one of these civil suits, and then he didn't have the money to continue the case, and you were like, "No, let's continue the case because I want my legal fees back." That's what Wikipedia said. So I think that that always made sense to me as a standard of, if you go, especially like, let's say you make a false accusation against somebody that could land them in jail, and it turns out it was fabricated. The idea that the state doesn't just reactively, immediately, necessarily initiate a counter prosecution against the fabricator as, engaging in slander, that always seemed, because that's having to go to court, even if you don't pay court fees, having to put on a suit and go to court, that's time, that's money. And so it just seems like there's this huge black hole. I mean, you even have it in small cases, right? Someone gets falsely arrested by the police because of mistaken identity or whatever. And that person did nothing wrong, but now they just spent some time in jail or they got arrested or whatever. And there's no compensation when the cops make a bad call, the citizen. But if it rises to the level of I guess murder or something, then you get like a multi-million-dollar payout. If the cops accidentally murder somebody. So there's a certain threshold where that logic kicks in, but it seems like if you're minorly inconvenienced, then it's just like, well, it's just a casualty of living in America, I guess, is the fact that that's what
I
it is.
agree the threshold is high. It's an interesting point you make. I don't think a lot of people get you are obviously a very deep thinker and you got to the third and fourth order consequences of these matters. I think that w- the threshold should be lowered, but I also agree that in some cases it's best to let the private party do that. So, for example, if we prevail on the merits against this sugar brother of Hunter Biden's, in both cases were completely ridiculous. I mean, cooked up in it's so ludicrous what they've accused me of that it's hard to give it the dispassionate analysis that it requires. But if we're to prevail in the case that Kevin Morris brought against us, we are going to file a malicious prosecution case. So we are going to be doing what you alluded to there. But even so, it's not initiated by the state. It's initiated by the private party that was wrong, that was inconvenienced. I would say in both of our cases, it's been more than a minor inconvenience just because of they forum shopped. Just like until recently, until the Supreme Court made its best decision of 2025 to stop universal injunctions, which are unconstitutional, these left wing legal hitmen, led by, in part, Mark Elias and Norm Eisen, they would forum shop. They would pull out their sheet of paper and map and find the most virulently left wing judge they could find, put the plaintiffs in their court, and get the universal injunction. It is an absolute mockery, but they were able to do that. Same thing on the civil side. Hunter and Morris sued me in Santa Monica and Los Angeles, probably the fourth worst run judicial systems in the United States behind DC, New York, and Chicago. I live in the middle of Illinois, basically the Iowa section of Illinois. Those places are so foreign to every synapse of mine. I mean, they are. I live in a town of 12,000 people, right? There's like 5 stoplights in my entire town, meaning they went to the most left wing, ridiculous venues they could find, and that's what drove up the cost. So it's been more than a minor inconvenience for me. And Morris is going to the mat on this because he knows if right now we're in the appellate court, we have oral argument in Los Angeles on July 24th. I'll be out there. If he knows that if we win at this appellate level, we are suing his ass for millions of dollars. This can't go on. We can't go on like this. And I'm just one of the few people who will not let it die. Like, Hunter wanted us to agree to a dismissal without legal fees. Bullshit. This man child, because once you look me up online, the press is so dishonest that they just repeat his claims, even though there's zero evidence for anything he put in his lawsuit. I never hacked Hunter Biden. I can't hack Hunter Biden. I'm a writer. I have no technical proficiency. It's freaking ridiculous. But that lawsuit was just a very expensive press release for them. So what we are doing right now, my team of volunteers that works with me, they are assembling a master Excel file of every single article that was ever written about the lawsuit between me and Hunter. They're about 250. And we're going to be emailing and contacting every single writer once we win this appeal and demanding that they have a follow-up article showing once and for all this was completely frivolous. This was nothing more than a press release. We didn't hack anybody. Hunter's a man-child. This is not how men handle their disputes. I mean, where I come from, it's just so I'm not litigious. Like if Hunter were honorable and had wisdom, he would have said, Garrett, I know you're really digging into me like nobody's done before. Why don't we just sit in a conference room for 12 hours and you can ask me any question you want? That's what a man would have done. But no, he acts like a little bitch and brings a lawsuit that isn't worth the paper it's written on. I mean, that's the worst of America. The founders, who I revere, and not in every way, but in key ways, they would be embarrassed and they would be embarrassed of the trial lawyers who enabled this dog shit, Abby Lowell, Paul Salvati, Gregory Ellis, Rick Harpootlian, these are all lawyers for Hunter. They are enabling this. All of them should be disbarred because they are putting knowingly false information in their suits. And every lawsuit filed by an attorney in every state, with implicit within that is a sworn declaration under the penalties of perjury that what they're putting in the suit is that which they believe to be true. And I know for a fact Lowell and others don't even believe the BS they're spewing. They're spewing it because it was an in-kind campaign donation to Joe. And I don't want any of your listeners to think I don't have this level of energy towards Republicans. I do. We attack all. We're an equal opportunity offender. You will find haters of our group in every camp of American politics. We've been defamed by the APAC crowd all the way from DDoS secrets, hated on by every single group. It's quite interesting. By the way, can I take 5 and go get some more coffee?
Yeah, go ahead. We'll pause it.
Okay. What our group does, we are essentially a private investigative group. We have a PI on our board along with an attorney and a technical guy. So we apply the tools and resources of private investigative work to public figures. So instead of, when you think of a PI, you think one of the things you think about is trying to help out a guy to see if his wife's cheating on him. Although that work is interesting and important to the dude who's hiring the PI, I find that work to be boring and short-sighted. So we try to use the PI framework of I'm very much into genealogy. One of the first things we do when we dig into a particular subject is create a family tree. You have to know where the person's coming from. And this is where sociology comes into it. I essentially think of myself as a right-wing sociologist. We're very few and far between. The field is dominated by very left-wing people, but we are taking the principles of private investigative work in sociology and applying them to corruption research. And I find the work itself to be intoxicating. My favorite way to spend a day is digging into a particular research subject and figuring out what makes them tick and unraveling their life. So a lot of my day is spent looking at public records, looking into genealogy, and that's what you'll find in our book. I'll send you a physical. If you give me a good address, I'll send you a physical copy of our book, and you'll see. And it's free online if you want to read the PDF version, BidenReport.com. But if you look at the book, you'll see the level of detail that we went to with the Biden family. But it's beyond the Biden family. It's really the Bidens are just a node they're just a spoke in the wheel. What the book is about the entire wheel. And some spokes are more important than others, depending upon how long they are and how much weight they bear. But they're a central spoke. But to really understand someone, you have to look at their family dynamics and everything else. One of the best political biography books in American history was written by a liberal writer named Richard Ben Kramer, released in 1992. It's a book called What It Takes, and it's about the 1988 presidential primary, and he profiles 6 people, 6 candidates. One of those candidates is Joe Biden. One of the first books I read on Joe in early 2021 was Richard Ben Kramer's What It Takes. And I've watched every interview by Richard Ben Kramer on C-SPAN and other platforms. And I urge everybody to go look this guy up, because one of his key insights is one of the things that made and of course he won the Pulitzer, he won the National Book Award. One of his key insights is you want to understand somebody, you've got to get off your ass and you got to go talk to the people that knew them when they were young and that make up their social milieu, right? And it's one of the key insights that we had about the Bidens. So what did I do? I went to Delaware and actually stayed there for weeks on end, because Joe Biden was a senator in Delaware for 36 effing years. That's longer than I've been alive. And the amount of people who love him and hate him. I mean, he has his own trail of tears, to use a Jacksonian phrase. The Bidens have their own trail of tears. People they've screwed in Delaware, people who they've helped along in Delaware. But unless you go there, you're never going to get a full view of the person. And I know you're into philosophy. So I'll put it this way, and I'm understating. You're not just into philosophy; it's like your life. And one thing that everybody needs to understand is that if you want to understand a particular philosopher, it's not just enough to read them. You have to get in. You have to get inside their world. So one of my favorite non-Christian philosophers, Nietzsche, and most people don't realize that Nietzsche was the son of a Lutheran pastor, the grandson of a Lutheran pastor, and that colors. And his dad died young. That colors so much of his outlook. And so that's what we try to bring to our work. And I think that's why we have such a loyal readership. Very few people leave or stop following us. Once they discover our group, they realize that we're doing something that the right doesn't have. There's no other group like us on the right. So I think that the left had a version of this with Fusion GPS. They did the Steele dossier with Fusion, but beyond that, nothing else exists like that in the country.
There's well, I think the first thing I ever heard about the story with Hunter Biden and the laptop was this idea that it was, I think you mentioned like a Russian intelligence operation. And I think a lot of the, well, I guess I don't know if you can answer this question, but on the other hand, I've seen a lot of accusations against Joe Biden of he's not just typically corrupt in the way that we imagine some, big boss politician to be.
My sweat.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't have your camera on my end. I'm just looking at the thing right now. But anyway, there's a classic tradition. Like actually, after World War II, I think it was 1946 in Tennessee. There was actually a battle. You can look up battles on American soil, and there was a battle between like local militias versus the police force because it had become so corrupt where the mayor of the town owned the police and he owned the factory. I don't know off the top of my head, but if you look up like 1946 battle on American soil, Tennessee, people can look into that. And that's sort of a classic American story of corruption, right? You have money and politics get together in a monopolistic way to control things, voter intimidation, right? So that's a part of the American story. I mean, Tammany Hall, I mean, there's all sorts of corrupt stories in American politics, but I think, people are kind of used to that, and it's almost forgivable in a way, like Rob Blagojevich or Eric Adams or something. It's like, yeah, maybe they did some corruption, but, every politician's corrupt, whatever. So there's not this like moral panic over it. And I think both the story about the idea that the Hunter Biden laptop isn't real, it's Russian disinformation, versus the criticism of Biden that, Hunter Biden was working for China or he was working for Ukraine, he was working for these foreign governments. So I see on both sides there's a hypervigilance about foreign influence in a way that is bifurcated, right? We had, of course, during the Cold War, the idea that, there were Russian spies and they were coming in and they were, McCarthyism and whatnot. But that was very kind of monopolar. And, it was really just the Russians. We weren't worried about anybody else. Now it seems there's a bifurcation of American politics where the left is really worried about Russian influence, and the right wing is really worried about Ukrainian influence and Chinese influence. So, like, I guess my opinion on this is maybe that both sides, maybe not in the individual specific case of this particular laptop or something like that, but it seems to me like every government in the world would want to influence the United States. And if they can use money to buy influence, then they're going to do that. So that seems like reasonable on both sides to me. Um, the idea that there's no influence whatsoever going on seems a little bit ridiculous. Um, I don't know. So do you think when you look at this case, I mean, from your perspective, um, do you look at this as the case of somebody who is corrupt and they're kind of acting as a I don't know, sort of a hedonistic, people are giving me money and I'm doing deals or whatever? Or do you view this as an ideological thing? Like, I think people have mentioned like Eric Swalwell or something of like Nancy Pelosi is like a Chinese agent, or Hillary Clinton sold the uranium to Russia. Like, there's an ideological globalist element. Do you think that those are indistinguishable? What do you think about kind of motives when you're assessing these kind of actions or this corruption?
Well, it's, I think, different for each person. With the Bidens, I compare them to kind of cheap whores. Some women are high dollar. Hunter will know this well. Some women are high dollar, some are not. And for the Bidens, I don't see it primarily driven ideologically. Yes, I think the Bidens have awful political views. And yes, I think they are more globalist than not. However, I think those positions were developed in them because the people paying them had those positions. So Joe or Hunter could have been sold or could have been bought by a different foreign entity. So I don't think that Hunter and Joe are necessarily driven by ideology as much as they're driven by themselves. Somebody asked me, what does Joe Biden believe? Because Joe has changed his position on every single topic, from busing to abortion to taxes, every single one of them, partly because he's been in the Senate in public life for so long. I mean, he's been there since 1972. So he's changed on every single position. So somebody asked me, what does he believe in? What's the core of him? And I honestly answer, and I would put this up, and I have, if you go through our book, there's a million reasons to believe this, that Joe Biden believes in Joe Biden. That's his belief. He got into public service for adulation. So I don't think it's an ideological thing for him. I think it's what maintains his standing as a public official. With other people, I don't think it's like that. With other people, there's this phrase, true believer. I'm not sure that Joe Biden is a true believer, and I don't think Hunter Biden is either. There's a lot of Republicans in the laptop that were friendly with Hunter Biden, even Tucker Carlson, right? Lived across the street from him. Their wives were friends. Susie and Kathleen did cooking classes together, right? So Hunter Biden wasn't insufferable to be around. He just wanted cash. There are other people who I think are more ideologically driven. Well, the first that comes to mind is Dianne Feinstein. Dianne Feinstein was, and she's the one in the wheelchair that just croaked. Her and her husband, second husband, they were all about China's rise, and they made a lot of money off of it. But I also think there was a global left-wing component to it. So each particular, sin comes in a lot of flavors. And what is unique about this case, amongst all the other political scandals, and the right made so many mistakes on this, the Republicans made so many mistakes in the rollout of the material. That's partly why we founded Marco Polo. It's partly why we put this book together, because we were so dissatisfied with what the GOP was doing with it. They made it an October surprise, which allowed the left wing to say, this is nothing more than an October surprise smear campaign, right? They shouldn't have done that. They should have released it sooner. But Rudy, God bless him, he is totally technically incompetent. He couldn't even make a copy of a hard drive if you had a revolver to his head. He doesn't know anything about tech. He has somebody do that for him, right? So you had people trying to expose the corruption who were technically deficient in what they were looking at. So there are so many angles to this. What makes this story insane, though, is the amount of data. In our book, and I'll send you a copy, in the first 10 pages, we go through different examples of technological device scandals, from Anthony Weiner sending nudes to a 15-year-old in North Carolina, from a Republican New Jersey congressman sending nudes to a random person on Craigslist, from Hillary Clinton putting a server in her closet. All this occurred. And that one woman, Katie Johnson, congresswoman from California, doing heroin and posing buck naked with her staffer, who was bisexual. She was with her husband and the staffer. These scandals will continue to go on. They'll continue to pop up. But the incredible thing about the Biden laptop is the amount. We have 200 gigabytes, and not just photos of risk. Everybody focuses on the risque photos. Yeah, they're incredible and Nero-like. I'm interested in them, but they're like the 17th most important topic. We have everything else that's buried in it is where the meat and bones are. All the communications between all these different swamp rats. That's where I'm interested, and that's how we became famous on the American right. Is we put together this email database where everybody can go read the emails. We were a mini WikiLeaks for the Biden laptop. That's what got people interested. So you can not just see what Hunter is saying to somebody else, but sometimes Hunter, because he's so lazy, he's on the CC line, not doing any of the working or typing himself, and those emails are just as, if not more, revelatory than the one where Hunter's the interlocutor, because you get to see what other people say. That's why, by the way, that's why the cover-up operation was so pronounced, and why I called it Pavlovian dog-like, because once people saw the contents, they knew it was bigger than Joe and Hunter, which is the reason for our book. This is bigger than Joe and Hunter. If it were just about Joe and Hunter, we wouldn't have spent this much time on it. It's because there's 128,000 emails and everybody else is communicating, and sometimes they're on the CC line. Sometimes the person isn't even in the email chain, but they're being talked about. Those are the really juicy ones, because you get to see, you know, that old phrase, what Peter says about Paul says more about Peter than about Paul. That's heightened in the Biden laptop. What people say about others in a sinful, non-Christian environment is very revelatory, because it's mostly it's the closest thing to what they really believe, rather than what they say to the person, because most people don't have the kahunas to say exactly what they mean. That's why before we got online, you were talking about other people wanting to edit interviews and make it a polished product. I don't operate like that. There should be, I would be comfortable with every single phone call that I have throughout a day being aired. We should all live our lives that way, because that's being truthful, right? The essence of sociopathy is having a different face for each different person. And you see that in the Biden laptop. I mean, I know Hunter so well that I know when he was high and when he was sober. And I know when he's lobbying somebody, because he changes personalities. He can be, to somebody who he needs something from, Hunter can be a very charming individual. That's why he has this daughter in Arkansas, right? It wasn't just because of his money. He could charm attractive, lower IQ females with his charm. He can be a charming person, not when he's on crack, but when he was sober. But when you read 128,000 emails from somebody, you really get a heaping dose of sociology. This family was arguing about whether or not Hallie, the daughter-in-law, was going to get tested for HIV, because Hunter was trying to force her to get tested because she visited a black male escort in Philly, and he just was convinced that black male escort had HIV. He's like, so before I sleep with you again, you will get tested, Hallie. This is all borne out in our book. I mean, the stories are unbelievable. And don't think we're naive that we don't think this shit goes on every single day. If we had Podesta's laptop, it'd be the same kind of shit. Not with John in particular, because I don't think he's as sexually depraved as Hunter is. But this kind of thing is Washington. It'd be like, I've been to 31 states on our book tour. I'm going to go to all 50. In most of the stops, I start out by saying, imagine if Nero had a son. Nero didn't have a son, but imagine he did. And that son left a laptop at a Roman repair shop, and somebody picked it up because Nero's son forgot to. That is what we have here. We have just like the Old Testament, we have every sin in the laptop. We have uh, licentiousness, fornication, greed, jealousy, turf wars. It's all there, just like the Old Testament. That's why when somebody says, "Oh, the Bible is boring," well, then they apparently haven't read the Bible. Bible is one of the most fascinating works of literature. I'm a Christian, but even if I weren't, some of my most intelligent non-Christian friends have all read the scriptures, top to bottom, because every human emotion is represented in the Old and New Testaments. You got everything. You got stepsons sleeping with their stepmother. There's every single thing under the sun in the Old and New Testaments. It's such a tour de force of human personality. And that's why I was so enthralled by the data on the laptop. And again, many people have this thing, right? There were like 200 people on the right who had a copy of his laptop, but the right is just so disorganized, and so many of them are so stupid that they cannot figure out a system to disseminate the material. And that's what I did. I figured out a system to get everybody talking about it. So if you go to our site and search every time our work has been featured in articles, it's over 500 different articles in the last 2+ years that have used our email database. And that was the point of the email database, because everybody in 2021 was just saying, have you seen his laptop? Have you seen his laptop? It's nuts. It was like a cliche, right? The story was getting beaten like a dead horse. We put the database together so that everybody was singing from the same tune. That it was no longer like that game in the cafeteria where somebody says one thing and by the end of the chain it's completely different, right? No. We're going to create a database where everybody is looking at the same material, the same authentic data, and then you can draw the conclusions that you want. Some of my best arguments were I was the expert witness for the mother of Hunter's child. I mentioned that child down in Arkansas he has. I was retained by the lawyers for that woman in 2023. They saw the book I wrote and were flabbergasted. I was the expert witness for the mother of Hunter's child. Some of the best arguments I've ever gotten in about the laptop's contents were in the deposition in that case, because Hunter's attorneys really started dialoguing with me about particular interactions. Those are the best arguments when we're really discussing and arguing, because I'm a pugilist. I really love a good argument about what particular interactions prove, right? Because there's elements to statutes and you have to hit each element to be guilty of a crime. So we're accusing Hunter Biden of crimes. We accuse him and his associates of violating 459 laws based on the laptop's contents. Those are serious charges. And like you said, if an accuser says something that turns out to be false, that's number one, it's a sin. Number two, that person should be sued into oblivion, right? Hunter never sued me for defamation, though, because he knew, because he saw the deposition and everything else, that we were absolutely meticulous. There is so much stuff we left out of the book because I could not prove, beyond clear and convincing evidence that he did a particular act, right? So we would need like an ATM transaction. We would need some type of Venmo transaction to prove that he paid this hooker on this night, or he took money from this Mexican oligarch for this official act. If we don't have that, where my morality comes from is you put something false about somebody. That's why I'm so vicious to most of the left-wing press, because what they write about me is 80% is just utter slop. They don't do any work, no cross-referencing, not even asking me. They don't even reach out for comment. It's absolutely disgusting. You put something false about somebody in writing, they better burn your ass if you can prove that it's false. So how it ends with Hunter, I think he's going to get divorced on a personal level. Personal level, I don't think I think Melissa's probably going to leave him within the year. Joe could die very soon. There'll be a fight between Hunter and Jill over the assets because they got the two homes. They got the beach house in Rehoboth, and they got the mansion in Delaware on the lake. Jill and Hunter don't like each other. And it'll be full-on Seinfeld shit over those assets because Hunter has $18 million in legal fees. So it'll be disgusting. If anybody thinks there'll be less drama from the Bidens over the next 18 months, they're naive. His family operates like a pack of feral dogs. So, like if you ever seen feral dogs in the wild, if you've ever been on a safari, they're vociferous with fresh new kills. I mean, they never share anything. All the wild dogs are tearing at stuff. That's going to be the Biden family real estate pot after Joe croaks. And we went into who Joe's power of attorney is. Mel Monzak, 85-year-old guy who's been Joe's power of attorney since 1986. He has final say on a lot of this shit. So I bet right now Hunter's trying to get power of attorney from Mel. He's trying to get his dad to sign that over from Mel to Hunter. So stuff is fascinating. So much sin, totally Christless world, where the idea of self-sacrifice and doing something without counting the cost, right? All those are scriptural verses. It's non-existent there. Their version of love is sort of an Italian omerta, where it's based on, don't talk to the authorities. We stick together because we're strongest in the pack. That's not a Christian conception of family life. Omerta is not love. Omerta is self-preservation through not giving each other up, not being a snitch. So people always ask, I pray for Hunter's soul. I really do, because his soul is dark. And that's why he's been so unhappy. And that's why he got addicted in the first place, because there's a gaping hole in his heart from the death of his mother and his dad. I mean, his dad basically prostituted him. You hear about these cases in the press about somebody sold their 11-year-old for sex. It's absolutely horrific. Joe didn't do that, obviously. Joe did it in another way. Hunter was the de facto bagman for the family. So Joe had a Senate salary, but he couldn't live off that because Joe had to have a mansion in suburban Delaware where the DuPonts lived. So he used Hunter as sort of the family bagman. As a father myself, I have 3 little kids under 4. That is absolutely repulsive behavior. Repulsive. Hunter always wanted to be a writer at the New Yorker, but he was pressured into this line of work because he got his girlfriend pregnant, number one. And number two, they needed a family bagman. And Hunter's older brother, Bo, was this goody two-shoes who was supposed to be the president. Joe was never supposed to be the president. Joe wanted to retire after his vice presidency and for Bo to run for president after being governor of Delaware. But that didn't work out because Bo died of brain cancer. So you had all these different factors feeding into what drove Hunter to be such a decrepit individual. And I get all that. I've told Hunter all that to his face, and he knows it, but it's going to be hard for him to accept that when his dad's still, puttering around.
You mentioned John Podesta, brings it back to 2016, the Pizzagate scandal with, I guess, Hillary Clinton's emails referencing pizza, napkins, and hot dogs, and all these things that were associated with secret pedophile code words. You said that you thought John Podesta was less of a pervert than Hunter Biden.
Not in the same way. I think I don't think I would call him less of a pervert. I think they're different sexually. Like Hunter, for example, would film himself, right? He'd film himself having sex with prostitutes. I don't think Podesta's like that. I think it's much more private, much more private in his perversions.
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, you say you try not to report on anything that you can't verify with receipts and Cash App and whatever. And so I guess I'm asking you, it sounds like, or I guess my question is, are you saying that you don't believe that Hillary Clinton and her associates were using pedophile code words, or are you saying that you can't verify? I mean, because those are two different opinions. One is like, I think yeah. So can you kind of clarify, like, maybe your opinion on that, not speaking as a Not saying like I know this absolutely to be true, but maybe your gut feeling. I don't know if you've researched it, but they do seem to be parallel cases. Pizzagate versus the Hunter Biden. I mean, there's a lot of parallels and maybe some differences. Maybe you could
There are
spell
parallels,
that out.
and there are different. There are the same fixers in each case. Two people that I'd like you to analyze based on what I've read and listened of you is Michael Gottlieb and Andy Kroll. Gottlieb is an attorney. He used to work with Hunter Biden at Boyce Schiller Flexner and is now at one of the most elite firms in the world called Wilkie Farr. And then Andy Kroll is a shitlib writer at Rolling Stone and ProPublica. Both men are despicable, but I've studied both men, done a thorough digital colonoscopy on both men, know their whole family trees, everything. And those two played cleanup in both cases. So whereas most people on the right focus on, who is talking about this on the right, and for good reason, there are people putting out good material on these matters. But my first instinct is to go to, okay, who is the left dispatched to play cleanup? Both cases, same two guys, Kroll and especially Michael Gottlieb. Michael Gottlieb has been at the center of every left-wing scandal for the last decade. Every single time the left is in deep shit, Michael Gottlieb's there. I look at lawyers as the 21st century knights. I'm a Lutheran, so I always think back to the time of the Reformation. If you wanted to go from Hamburg to Augsburg in 1530, it wasn't like today. There's no freaking interstate. You'd have to go on a horse. But it would be stupid to go alone because there were a bunch of thieves who were hiding out along, we had this in the American West, stagecoach robbers where they'd pull a gun out and you have to give them all your shit. The only way you could get from Hamburg to Augsburg safely most of the time was to have a knight with you, somebody who would guard you as sort of a personal bodyguard on your journey. That is the analogy I have over the course of years started to use with modern American litigious culture. Lawyers are essentially the modern knights. And every time the left gets in trouble, they send a knight like Michael Gottlieb, a totally sleazy, media-connected, left-wing super lawyer who knows every big mafia that's running the country. He knows the media mafia. He knows who's who in the Italian mafia. He knows who's who in the Jewish mafia. This guy, I have a Google alert just for Michael Gottlieb because every time that 5'5" pissant shows his face, there's a scandal there. He's a vacuum cleaner. So that has been very revelatory because in getting back to your question, all the research I've done on the emails, I've looked at Gottlieb and every single answer that he's provided, because remember, he was like very into fighting disinfo, and he'd be on MSNBC at the end of 2016 calling, everybody who was disturbed by the emails conspiracy theorist. They haven't offered a single explanation for any of this stuff. There are a couple, the Bidens had a favorite phrase. One person we talked to in the drafting of this report was Tony Bobulinski. He was an old business partner of Hunter's. And he said one of the favorite phrases of Jimmy Biden, who also got a pardon, Joey's lookalike younger brother, is plausible deniability. And so I always try to look in that email cache that you alluded to in the WikiLeaks emails. I always look for, okay, what is the plausible deniability of the people talking in this email? What could they say that could explain away what appears to be obvious coded language? And there are a half a dozen of those emails where there is no plausible deniability. The first one that comes to mind is the one where it says there was a handkerchief with directions on it. And it's supposed to be like walnut related or something. So I look at the most egregious ones first. And the most egregious ones, I'll pull it up, Gottlieb has no answers for. And I always stick on those. So instead of talking about, the 24 that are weird and that could have plausible deniability, and I did this with Hunter, and that really pisses him off because Mike Gottlieb always wants to go back to, no, let's go to this email where there is an explanation, We do know that the Podestas are Italian and they do cook a lot and they do have guests over and have house parties. Okay, let's just, for the purpose, I don't believe a word they're saying, but let's just, for the purposes of argument, stipulate to that. How in the hell do you explain this one? I'm pulling it up right now. I'm going to get the exact date. This one is just unbelievable. No, September 4th, 2014. September 4th, 2014. So over a decade ago. The realtor found a handkerchief. I think it has a map that seems pizza related. Is it yours? They can send it if you want. I know you're busy, so feel free not to respond if it's not yours or you don't want it. That is from Suzanne Sandler from the Sandler Foundation on September 2nd, 2014. And John wrote back the next day, it's mine, but not worth worrying about. So how in God's holy name can you explain a map that seems pizza related? What is the plausible deniability there, right? So that's how I would approach that topic. Hopefully it answered your question, meaning Podesta's never answered a single question on this. When is Podesta going to have a primetime interview with the lights on saying, you got to explain this? Because remember, he has no plausible deniability. He can't just say that, well, Susan was out of her mind and wrote that. I can't control what people write to me in my email inbox. But no, he did respond the next day and said, it's mine, but not worth worrying about. So he has no plausible deniability. He's never been asked about this in any uncomfortable setting. Everything has just been dismissing it out of hand. It's absolutely repulsive.
Yeah, I mean, so at the time, 2016, you had these emails surfacing, and the theory that was popular at the time was that, I guess these were code words that, and I don't know how far back these code words go, but the idea is these are pedophile code words, and so it's referring to like children who are locked in a basement, and it's like, do you want to sex traffic this child? Now that I'm looking back on it, it seems more plausible. I accept the idea that these are code words, but it seems more plausible that this is more referring to things like, the kind of corruption, whether it's, hey, China wants you to, lobby for them, or the mafia wants you to, do this casino deal or something. And that's the kind of, now, I mean, based on, so we're kind of accepting here the idea that, this is coded language. What do you think it's more likely that there's a secret, and again, we're not accusing, I'm just saying, in general, hypothetically, this language, are you more on the side of, I think there's an elite pedophile spirit cooking cabal here? Do you think it's more kind of Hunter Biden? Because
there's been no evidence for it, right? So I can't speculate. All I know is that no serious investigation has been done, and they have dismissed all of this without any sound explanation. So I do think that the people on the right, because the lying press is so mendacious, in almost every single power industry in the United States is so corrupt and disgusting that they can give way to conspiratorial thinking. So, for example, like the basement at Comet Ping Pong, people will just pick up on that, and if they repeat it enough, they'll believe it. That's why I only focus on on the emails where I think there is no plausible deniability. Like, it's obvious coded language. The question then becomes, like you said, what is the coded language about? And that's where I stop, because I don't have any primary source evidence to guide me along any further. If new evidence arises, like this Seth Rich murder, I'm very intrigued with that. I've been trying to get the U.S. Attorney in D.C. to open the grand jury because there's no statute of limitations for murder. And it's one of the few robberies where nothing was taken on the decedent. So nothing adds up. And the laptop that belonged to Seth Rich was taken by his brother right after he was murdered. I don't know about you. I don't have a brother. I do have a sister. But the last thing I'm worrying about if my sister gets murdered is to grab her laptop. I mean, it's nuts. I don't. That's an afterthought. Going through my sister's belongings would be something I would do 3 months down the line after I stopped crying, and after one night, months later, where I'm missing her and uh, am consumed by my thoughts about her. That's the stuff you do months after somebody dies. That situation to me, I think, deserves an immediate investigation, even more so than the emails, because there is, remember Andy Kroll, that other guy that I alluded to beyond Michael Gottlieb. Andy Kroll wrote a bullshit book in 2022 called A Death or a Murder on W Street. And he castigated everybody who thinks there's more to the Seth Rich murder as kooks, paraphrasing it. But that would make more sense, Andy Kroll, if there were an actual charge or trial of somebody who did it. But Andy Kroll came out with a debunking book on a cold case. When the case is still cold, that's not when you do the debunking, right? A rational person does a debunking book after somebody else has already been convicted of the murder. You have a public trial, they're convicted and say, hey, look, these are all the reasons why the people outside of the case who are saying this, here's why they're wrong. Oh, and by the way, a jury thought so too. But Andy Kroll just cooked this shit up and released a ridiculous book about it. And, me and him have gone a couple rounds on Twitter. He's despicable. Both Kroll and Gottlieb have the physiognomy of rodents. Dude, they're absolutely repulsive people. They are some of the most mendacious individuals in America today. And they have tens of thousands of people listening to them. Michael Gottlieb's wife ran the news desk at CBS. Juliana Goodman, and interviewed Obama and everything. These are people who are very plugged in. The two people I'm talking about, Kroll and Gottlieb, are old friends. Gottlieb probably did a dozen interviews for Kroll's book, and everywhere they turn up, there will be corruption. That is their. And now, who sends them on these tasks? I don't know.
I know we've kind of reached the hour mark here, so
any other stuff you want to discuss?
I mean, we could probably go on for several more hours, to be honest with you.
Maybe we can do another talk after our cases conclude.
Sure.
Which should be by the end of 25.
Okay. Yeah, I guess maybe I'll ask one last question, which is sort of the third. So I think in the last 10 years, we've kind of had three major scandals. We've had scandals related to Hillary Clinton, scandals related to Joe Biden, and then scandals related to Jeffrey Epstein, which did not, for whatever reason, these are somehow three separate things, which is an interesting question in itself, why they're all not just conglomerating together. But
Trump 47's term on Epstein in particular has been very disappointing. And I can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we can leave that for 6 months from now, or
let's put a bookmark in it, which is to say, the death of Jeffrey Epstein and the manner of it is interesting. It's interesting, but the more people discuss that, whatever their opinions are, means they're not discussing the most important aspect, which is who the hell he collaborated with. Not everybody he attempted to ingratiate himself with. That's why the Black Book, just like the Biden laptop, if somebody's in the Biden laptop, that doesn't mean they're guilty of a crime automatically, right? That's not nuanced, and that's not true. Sometimes Hunter was approaching people and they rebuffed him, and that's not a crime. Same thing with Jeffrey Epstein having somebody's contact information in his Black Book Doesn't mean they communicated with Epstein. What it does mean is that he tried to ingratiate himself with him. And a lot of people let him, like Bill Gates. And, if you're going to that island, that's where the plausible deniability stops. There's even a plausible explanation for being on the plane if there's not a bunch of 16-year-olds on there. But what they're missing with Epstein is, who the hell are his collaborators? They want us to be satisfied with just Ghislaine. But Ghislaine didn't go out on the street and get the girls in Palm Beach. She was the madam who saw him back at the house. I want to know who the hell went out and headhunted for that guy. And who did he share the girls with? When Bongino and Cash talk about his manner of death, that's every minute spent not talking about who he collaborated with. And that is the most important thing. And so I'm very angry at that, because it's 6 months in, and this clarity of thought that this may sound arrogant, but it's true. This clarity of thought is not being articulated right now. It's not just Epstein, just like it's not just Joe and Hunter. If it's just Joe and Hunter, the story stops being interesting after 6 months. It's the ecosystems. That's why you mentioned, they could be related. Yeah, they could be. That's why I talked about Gottlieb, because Gottlieb's in the ecosystem. Pick your scandal, whatever the scandal is, there's a good chance Gottlieb's going to be there, because Gottlieb is part of the ecosystem. That's what Marco Polo is about, is tracking the ecosystem and not the individual. So I'm very disappointed that we've had no other indictments from the Epstein cases. His manner of death is immaterial, in my opinion. Who he worked with is the most important thing. And it's been an utter failure so far on that, publicly.
Yeah, I'm actually convinced he did kill himself, and I do think that the way that people look at that case is basically upside down and backwards in terms of what's focused on and what's talked about.
Do you agree with what I said there?
I agree with the fact that the whole meme of Epstein didn't kill himself is a red herring. It doesn't matter, it's whether he committed suicide or whether the question is, okay, so why would somebody kill him? It's because he's involved in bad stuff. So what bad stuff did he do? We have crimes without perpetrators. We have the idea that he was operating a vast human trafficking network with his own private island, flying around all these people, but we don't have a single the story is that there were only two people who ever committed crimes were Jeffrey and Ghislaine, and that's not how human trafficking and prostitution. The idea that he had this empire where he was just having sex with all of these girls by himself, and maybe Ghislaine involved in some way. But as you said, I watched the Netflix documentary, and they were saying that it was sort of like a Ponzi scheme where they would recruit high school girls who would then be paid to recruit other high school girls. And as part of a plea deal, the high school, I saw one of the faces of this girl in this documentary. It was a while ago, but she was like, yeah, I used to feel really guilty for my involvement in this stuff, and I had to kind of forgive myself. And it was just kind of, we could go into maybe the morality of that and the philosophy of that, but what is this just almost like a hobby that he has that's completely disconnected from any kind of political corruption or money or policy? The things that he was involved with, he was actually patronizing certain scientific or educational projects and political projects. We could also have gotten into Sam Bankman-Fried. There's I guess a sexual aspect, unfortunately, there. I don't think it's so much of a blackmail aspect, but there's some things going on there. So maybe that's the fourth case we should have brought in. And I guess, yeah, go ahead.
We could do a series, because I did a deep dive on Sam Bankman-Fried,
yeah.
And I'm very interested in getting his brother charged, because Gabriel is a mess, and that whole family is demonic. And he's paying these Republican lobbyists right now to try to get him a pardon. Trump has made two bad pardons. One was a gangbanger in Chicago, and then the other one was Devin Archer, Hunter Biden's old business partner. I mean,
And chicken factory owner, and you didn't hear about that one, but
no, enlighten me. I'm not denying that it could be just as bad.
yeah,
I just
yeah.
am ignorant. I
I
didn't know
mean,
about it.
he's I can't. It's
What's
hard.
his name?
Well, I have to look up Hasidic chicken factory owner.
I will do it right now. One of my favorite quotes from The Sopranos is, remember, they're all around the table. He's like, I see him, but I don't believe him. Remember that one?
I've heard that. I think that yeah. I mean, we could go off in a million threads here about Trump's
Shalom
pardons, and
Rubashkakin.
I
Oh,
thought
this was in 17. Sorry.
yeah,
That's why I hadn't heard of it. It was in
yeah.
17. And he commuted him, didn't pardon him. I'm much more in favor of commutations in general than I am pardons. He was in Iowa. I didn't know there were Hasidic people in Iowa.
Yeah, anyway, that's the one that came. That's the first pardon that I think of. But yeah, we could get into pardons. We could get into more scandals. We could look at the Republicans and maybe why the country operates in this way, and what the solutions are, if there is a solution, or what the alternative is. But yeah, there's certainly more to get into. But I think this was a good introductory conversation. I think people know, who you are, where you stand, how to find you, how to support your cause.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I think it's kind of funny because, you apparently did. You did read a few of my articles, and I always, sometimes I set up these interviews and people don't read my articles, and then they last minute. I always imagine them being like, "Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into?" And I'm talking to this guy who's a little bit.
I'm German. I prepare as much as I can. I'm very interested in philosophy. Very, very interested. So that's what got me intrigued. And I asked about Stephen DeLay. I'll send you some of his materials. I'll send you his stuff offline. You'll be intrigued.
All right. Well, Garrett, I appreciate it. We'll see. We'll do a follow up in 6 months. Yes. and see where things stand.
Take care. God bless.
All right. Take care. Bye bye. All right. That's the end of that interview. I could have interjected a bit like, wait a second. How is this any different from anything the Republicans have done? Let's talk about whatever. I could have done that. I could have done that shtick. I'm trying to remember the ostrich coat, Paul Manafort. I could have talked about Trump taking a plane from Qatar. I could have talked about AIPAC and biggest lobbying organization in America. Did you see the Tucker interview with Ted Cruz? Eric Adams, some of this sexual stuff, it's like, we have what is it? I don't know if you think 3 million homosexuals on Grindr having sex every day, and it's like, you're concerned with X, Y, and Z. You're concerned with somebody using a prostitute, which, from my perspective, is already quasi-legal in America. It's quasi-legal. It's not, obviously, it's illegal, but you can go to Las Vegas. You can fly overseas and visit a prostitute and then come back. And, it's not like if you murder someone overseas or something, you come back, there's actually laws about that the government will, or like certain activities you can get prosecuted for even if they were committed overseas. Prostitution is not one of those. So all this stuff about, they're doing orgies, they're doing prostitution, they're gay. It's like, yeah, 3 million Americans are gay. Okay, well, I don't see all these sex scandals. I haven't seen any evidence that what Hunter Biden did, or what Hillary or the Podestas, or I haven't actually seen any evidence that they've done anything worse than, from that Christian conservative, adultery, man and a woman. I haven't seen any evidence that they're doing anything worse than what happens on Grindr every day. So what's the scandal? I guess the scandal is that we have some concept of civility where politicians are supposed to be above that. But we have openly homosexual politicians. So again, I'm saying from the Christian perspective, A man lying with a man. Pete Buttigieg being happily married, from a Christian perspective, should be more of a scandal than Hunter Biden lying with a prostitute. Men throughout the Bible, there are literal stories of men with prostitutes. I mean, the people of Israel allied with a prostitute to break into one of the cities of Canaan. You know, it never says the people of Israel allied with a homosexual or whatever. So from that Christian perspective, I don't see how any of this is a bigger scandal than Pete Buttigieg. From the biblical perspective, but I don't think most Christians really care about that. I think implicitly they accept the modern left-wing framing that, oh, well, it's a marriage. Well, he's married, so it's not that bad. But have you seen Hunter Biden paid a woman to have sex? It's like, I don't know, bro. It sounds like a nothing burger to me. But yeah, we can talk about corruption. And again, I don't think the Democrats or Republicans, I don't see evidence that one is significantly more corrupt than the other. If anything, the Republicans just do their corruption more openly and boldly and have more license to do it. But in terms of who's getting, you know, more foreign influence, and then the question is, you know, is foreign influence is it better to live in a society where there is no foreign influence, or is it better to live in a society where, yeah, we've got foreign influence and things are messy? I mean, the idea when he said, like, oh, well, Dianne Feinstein helped the rise of China. It's like Richard fucking Nixon helped the rise of China. So, you know, those were 15 minutes of questions that if I had interjected and tried to ask those questions, it would have just been a debate on one topic. We would have gone 1 hour on one topic, and I don't really care to debate one topic for an hour. I'd much rather try to get a broader spectrum in an interview, but that was my choice. You know, I'm not depends on the person. Some people I can kind of interrogate them and they'll sort of be like, okay, well, I didn't think of it like that, or, you know, but, you know, I can tell if I say, well, what about this? Then he's going to be like, all right, well, I'm going to spend the next hour doing a full I'm going to do a digital colonoscopy on you. And it's like, okay, we don't need to do the digital colonoscopy. I'd rather just have a chill interview than have a debate. That's my style. Bring people on. I mean, debating specific topics, I suppose if there's views and likes and clicks, but this isn't for views and likes and clicks. This is just me talking to people. This is just my social interaction for the day. So, hope you guys enjoyed. See you next time. Bye-bye.